Okay, the YouTube is now live and I reckon we're recording. Let's see. Record to the cloud.
It says it's live on YouTube in my top right hand corner, if that helps. It says
Yeah.
recording on YouTube, yeah.
Okay, cool. So we actually, let me pin you guys and then we could start off. And okay, I'm just gonna give Leon 1 minute and then we start off. Yeah. Okay, Leon's just jumping on right now and then we're gonna get started. No, Catherine, I was just getting a hold of Leon.
Oh, fair enough. I
Yeah.
didn't want to be missing something really critical, that was all.
Okay, just a few announcements. So everybody from our Caribbean and Nigerian community, if it starts dragging out the internet, just the YouTube is live. Cosmos, the internet, if it's causing you problems, just join on YouTube, okay? The audio and everything on YouTube is crystal clear. All right. Thanks, Kenil.
Always a team effort, right?
Yeah. Leon literally is jumping on the link right now, and then we're gonna get started because we have enough people in the room anyway. The rest are gonna watch the recording. There he is. Hey, Leon, that's gonna be 50 quid for being late, yeah?
My sincere apologies, bro. Technical issues. Hi, everybody, and I hope I haven't disturbed the flow of events too much. My apologies.
All right, cool. Let's get started then. First of all, to our panelists, this is just a quick one before we proper start, yeah? This is the most chill, casual webinar or conference or panel you've ever been to, yeah? So just be you, bring on the banter and let's just get live. There's no formalities and anything here, no long thing. All right, guys, I'm so happy to be here today. This is the final Crypto Mondays Caribbean for the year. We've had a brilliant year. It's been so exciting. We've done so many excellent things. We have new partners on board, XRPL Commons, big up yourselves. And David could make it today. So for all those who wanted to really see David, David could make it because he brought in a better expert today. Because there's things about RWA that he said he was going to get tongue-tied. So as CEO, he wasn't going to do that. So he had to ask Odelia to come and take the place like Wonder Woman in action, okay? So we have a very beautiful panel today. And it actually worked out well because now it's balanced. So we have 4 ladies and we have 4 gentlemen on the call. This is the most balanced Crypto Mondays Caribbean we've had in a long time because the ladies have been dominating the space. And at times the guys get intimidated by our expert ladies. And I love it. I'm here for it. So who are we going to start? The minority, the gents. Okay. So Scott, we're going to start with you. Make your introductions. So to the members of the audience, you know how we do it. We're going to start off with introductions, and then we're going to get right into it because our panel is hot and we don't have enough time. And then towards the end, we'll potentially have a Q&A. And if you're not comfortable going on the mic, you can just put your questions on the chat as we go along. And today, I'm going to nominate 2 people to help me with the questions. So today, I'm going to nominate Sarah to co-moderate. Yeah. And I'm going to nominate Leon because he was late. Right. So, Scott, I'm going to get started with you. So your introduction, please.
Yeah. Hey, everyone. I'm Scott Pounder. By way of background, I've got 20 years as an investigator, amongst other things. I did 16 years between the Metropolitan Police in London and the City of London Police, where I specialised in financial crime, complex fraud, cyber crime, and then crypto when that started to come along. And then from there, I left and joined Crystal Blockchain Analytics, software provider. I headed up their investigations team for a few years, dealt with everything right and wrong that can happen with crypto, mostly wrong though. Various court cases, disruption, sort of going after some organized crime groups, state-sponsored terrorist groups and things like that. And then from there, just over a year ago, I left there and I joined FTI, again, leading out the investigations practice, but just in regards of crypto. That's the short version. I shall pass to the next one.
All right. Susanna, we're going to move on to you because you guys are from the same company and you're probably going to pick up something Scott didn't say.
All right. Well, Susanna Esteban here. I lead the blockchain and digital assets practice here in Europe, and I work with Scott. And from my background, I'm an economist by career, and I'm in the crypto space since over a decade, which is quite a long time. Every time I look at it, nearly 1.5 decades now. Time flies, but I stumbled over the crypto space. I found it very interesting when then smart contracts came alive in 2014. I thought, that's it, that's disrupting everything, every industry. So I built my own consulting firm here in London, bridging the gap between traditional industries and this new emerging interesting technology. Built as well up the blockchain strategy program for the Said Business School at the Oxford University. And 2.5 years ago, I joined FTI to head up the practice here in Europe.
Thank you, Susanna. Very exciting stuff. Odelia?
Thank you so much. Good evening, good afternoon. Great being here with the Crypto Monday community. I actually know the community from other parts of the world, but very happy to join the Africa region.
And the Caribbean one, Odelia, as well. Don't cut out the Caribbean folks.
Oh, sorry, the Caribbean and the African. We don't discriminate at all.
Right.
So my name is Odelia Tortman. I'm Director of Corporate Adoption at XRPL Commons, which is basically an open source association under the XRP ledger, right? The protocol itself, whereby we're focusing on enhancing the adoption of the ledger, continuously developing more use cases that are utilizing XRPL and enhancing basically different types of functionalities, access, democratizing knowledge. We have all kinds of startup programs to basically encourage more and more builders and innovators to be building on the XRPL ledger. In terms of my personal journey, so I've spent 13 years in the world of digital finance, and very much like Susanna from the early days of the crypto, working quite globally. Before joining Commons, I was with the World Bank Investment Arm, IFC, basically focusing on digital finance based in Washington, DC, and doing a lot of projects that are focusing on digitizing all kinds of financial services by coming up with new products and so on and so on. Beforehand, I was head of blockchain and fintech at Deloitte. So indeed, back in the days where crypto just started, I remember when we were trying to look at it, is it an asset? Is it a currency? How can we look at it from another DLT-based solution to be including under our solution technological suite that we can offer, and basically really building this practice and the operation from the ground up. And beforehand, I was working at the Ministry of Economy at the EU R&D and Technology Directorate, focusing on all kinds of technology and R&D collaboration and investments. So I come from I would say, the intersection between the institutional side, the innovator side, the capital side, and very excited to be sitting here with this very amazing and knowledgeable panel to be discussing such an interesting topic such as tokenization. Thank you for including us.
Odelia, that's why David didn't come today, because he can't beat that. He literally can't beat that. Welcome. And, today's going to be so interesting because there's so many of our former students who are here from Nigeria and the Caribbean who really want to get to grips with protocol and to see how they can develop their ideas, like from idea to like real life. So thank you for being here. Now, Catherine.
Hi everyone, just getting off mute. So yeah, thanks so much for the introduction to come and speak. It's been fabulous. So my background is 20 years of mostly traditional finance for hyperscaling startups across pretty much every flavor of financial services, from retail to peer-to-peer. Fell into some of capital markets, tier one banks, hedge funds, asset managers, and was just so horrified by how inefficient pretty much the whole of financial systems are globally, that I fell into crypto about 6 years ago. So I've now worked for senior roles across a couple of crypto businesses. I've worked for an exchange, a tokenization engine, which hopefully should be useful for this evening. I've worked for a specialist Web3 cybersecurity, which was really interesting. I was global head of client there. And I've also done about a decade of board work now. So I currently sit as an advisor for AssetPass, which helps people pass on crypto and any other digital asset at the point of death. So I spend a lot of my time building out big businesses sort of from a strategy, sales, marketing point of view, but also spend a lot of time helping regulators, talking to the press, and all the cool madness that comes with crypto. So yeah, really looking forward to hearing lots of different viewpoints. I think there's a really fabulous cross-section of different expertise. So thank you very much.
Wow, the experience on this panel is blazing hot. Ladies in the building, I hope you're looking at these other women as your mentors. Yeah, go girl power. Come on, let's go. Right. Kenil, come on.
Hey, good afternoon, good evening, possibly good night. It is a pleasure to be here. My name is Kenil Legister. I'm with the Department of Treasury, IRS Criminal Investigation, and part of the CryptoMondays Caribbean African team. Man, this is awesome. I am too ecstatic about all this knowledge here. And of course, girl power. Love it. I've been with the IRS criminal investigation now for going on 20 years. Man, but I trust it's been exciting. It does go by quick. A lot of my focus, I'm actually based in the Caribbean. I do cover the whole Caribbean. Has just been focused on financial investigations and anything crypto related. My team, as well as the CryptoMondays Caribbean Africa team, focus on a lot of training and just educating, because I think that's where anything starts, whether it's within compliance, regulation, or just knowledge sharing. Education is key. So with that said, pleasure to be here. Look forward to this awesome conversation with this highly technical crew. Love it.
And speaking of education, all those who attended the No Long Thing bootcamp, they know the Sarah Adami Johnson. I have to say Sarah, you held it down. You always hold it down for us. So big up yourself and introduce yourself, please.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Brian, for the introduction. And I am ecstatic and I'm so looking forward to this conversation and learning for all my other co-panelists, which is a super impressive team. Really interesting backgrounds. As per myself, I am a high net worth planner for a Canadian amazing bank, RBC Family Office. I actually deal with a very niche spectrum in digital assets, which is really mortality management. I deal with digital assets and digital remains and digital estate entrepreneurship. So what do you do when you die and you have these amazing tokens? What are the points of friction and really weaknesses and the gaps in the planning? I know somebody has to be the one that does the deaths and taxes, and that should be me. And with that, I'll pass it along.
Thank you, Sarah. And Leon, Leon, bro, come on, tell us. You know you're the king mentor at Block Dojo and all that. So come on, introduce
Thank you.
yourself.
Cheers, man. Thank you so much. Thanks for
Yeah.
inviting me, of course, and hello to everybody. So my name's Leon Hurd. I guess my background, my trade is one as a regulatory lawyer. So that's sort of what I spend the majority of my time doing, helping clients deal with the regulatory frameworks around financial regulation, but with a heavy focus on tech regulation and those issues that pertain to blockchain, crypto, and all the other wonderful things in between. And I wear a second hat as a consultant for the company my business partner and I founded called Cyber Sandbox, where we essentially provide strategic advice and help clients from sort of that ideation phase with their businesses, working through the kinks early, trying to sort of front load those issues and help them go through the different stages from seed investment to scaling and all of the other bits as well. So we live and breathe the blockchain space, which is great. And I'm so impressed with the panel today. Like so many amazing insights I'm looking forward to receiving.
Thank you very much, Leon. Now, this first question goes out to everybody and is we are really trying to understand what's RWA and what's utility and how does it compare to what we have in with the legacy systems or traditional systems, as it were. And I know, Scott, you said you're going to come in to discuss the security aspects. So, but you can feel free to chime in at any point. So, Susanna, Kenil, Catherine, Sarah, Odelia, Leon, guys, the floor is yours. So you guys can pass on the mic accordingly. Whoever's ready to fire up, please start.
Yeah, I'm ready to take a tiny bit of this question and what is actually tokenization of real world assets and what does it mean even for a community? So at the end, tokenization involves the conversion of rights to an asset into a digital token using blockchain technology underpinning. And what does it mean? So it extends the execution efficiency of digitalization into custody and settlement layers. So at the end of the day, you take one right that you have in the real world and digitize it, and can include within this right that you have anything automated, being through smart contracts or being through any other automation and information that you want to include into the value of this token. I think that's an important way to move forward from a very illiquid assets such as we can see real estate, we can see as well other financial instruments that might be very illiquid, into make it much more liquid and create liquidity into the market and move it within the market. And please chime anyone in. It's a question for everyone here.
Yeah,
Odelia or Catherine. Okay, Catherine.
Yeah. So I'm a generalist. I've worked across a huge number of subsectors within crypto, and I think I don't disagree with anything that Susanna has just said, but I think it's such a fundamental change to how we think about any type of finance can be affected by tokenization. So actually, if you think about all those markets that have been hugely inefficient, hugely inaccessible, fairly, untransparent for its users, it massively changes complexity and inefficiency. And there's just so many benefits to that. So the one that's always chosen is predominantly property, because it's slow, it's really hard to earn a tiny little bit. People that have managed that tends to have found that it was fraud riddled. There's loads of projects pre-crypto that have looked at tokenizing real estate that have not flourished. So I don't think you can underestimate how much more efficient and accessible tokenization makes it. And I think people that talk about crypto, if you earn, if you're an institution and you've got, a couple of $1 billion worth of crypto, if you're, totally new to crypto and you've bought your first $100, to get the adoption to the next billion people and to get your Bitcoin to $200,000. And look, it's relatively recently people were saying to me, you're out your mind, Catherine, it will never hit 100K. We need these use cases in order for those really credible, sensible coins to flourish. So I think it's a great topic for a webinar, but I think it's just such a fundamental change in how the world thinks about finance. I don't think we can underestimate it culturally. And I think that's often overlooked.
So before I pass on the mic, where does it sit? So the audience in here, most of them are from our community, and they did a course recently, and they covered blockchain basics, smart contracts basics, NFTs, all that. So where does RWA sit? Because it's suddenly the new sexy word.
Sure. Last
year it wasn't quite there.
Sure.
The previous years it wasn't quite there. It's just the recent sexy word in the landscape.
So for me personally, and I'd love to hear the other panelists' view, particularly those that are coming from a crime background.
Right.
For me, it is the best application of blockchain technology, the best and the biggest. To me personally, maybe if you're a crime investigator, you'll feel differently about, sort of it being used for money laundering and people putting it through a mixer. But for me personally, tokenization is the single greatest thing that can happen to crypto as an industry and as an asset class. So I'll put that out to anyone that wants to build on that or perhaps disagree with me.
Oh, I definitely want to agree with you, Catherine. Keneal here. Frankly, I think you said it all. I agree with tokenization. I think, especially from my background, at the IRS, our mantra is follow the money. Just to keep everything light and positive, it does create for us a true proper ledger where we don't have to run around trying to find what the beneficial ownership is, where that entity was created. It's all spelled out for you right there in the public domain in essence. But just speaking of the good of tokenization is especially real estate. I was actually trying to think back to here in Barbados. I was being wishful, especially as I drive around to buy a piece of land. But the time I start to research it and want to get that beachfront property, you can't figure out actually where it's registered, its true cost, who may actually have the deed. But if we do put this on a particularly, especially applying it to real estate on some sort of blockchain, it does make it more accessible and it generates more revenue for that country or possibly that owner as well. So there's definitely cases where we're now stepping into a domain where everyone could benefit, whether from access or just being able to, gain access to different types of ways to invest, but appreciate that.
Thanks, Keneal. Odelia, Sarah, Leon, who's ready?
Yeah.
I see Odelia is ready.
Yeah, thanks. It's a big question, and I think that the team here said a lot of things that are relating to a lot of the different elements from this complex, ever-evolving picture, I would say. But start from where you started, right? What is tokenization? And why is this the sexy word of 2024, 2025, if you will? So in terms of definition, tokenization is basically linking a financial asset to a specific tokenized, which is bound to a protocol, whether it's DLT or blockchain or the others. And if you double click on the word financial asset, that is in the eyes of the beholder, right? So some would say gold, other, like Keneal here is related to real estate, other would say data. We have an entire world of existing assets that currently are being placed on the balance sheet. We have entire balance sheet of companies that are also assets, that are currently sitting there, not benefiting, not yielding anything, which also represent a huge play in terms of where can we take it from there. So I think that in the end of the day, what distributed ledger and blockchain protocols enable you to do is basically the ability to index all kinds of assets. And as this industry matures, we come up with different titles, right? So today we call it securitization, tokenization of real world assets. In the end of the day, if you look at the blockchain, it's basically a ledger that enables you to index and to securitize and to almost register all kinds of assets in a way which enables you, A, to hold the value, to harness the value, and to transfer the value. And these are basically the core element that sits at the heart of economical systems. So I think that in terms of the potential, it's huge. In terms of different types of application, I mean, it goes above and beyond. I'm a bit more skeptical with regards to the operational implementation, I would say. So I do agree 100%. There's a lot of potential, but having worked with financial institutions and their backbones and their legacy systems and trying to transform them towards becoming more digital in technologies that are less disruptive and less innovative, it is always a challenge. And I think that one of the key challenges that we're still facing vis-a-vis tokenization, vis-a-vis institutional DeFi-based application is indeed how you integrate and the interoperability element within the financial system, both within internally its system, and then as the next level, enabling those different systems, those different balance sheets between financial institutions to interact. Because the ability just to tokenize a token still do not grant it with liquidity. The ability to grant it to liquidity basically has to do with the fact that you're unable to trade it, to exchange it, both internally within a financial institution and also externally between others. And I think that this is something very important to mention, because many times people say tokenization equals liquidity, but it's not necessarily the case. Tokenization equals liquidity if you create the optimal terms for trade.
But you can see that it makes it much easier, Adelia. And so it's a ridiculous question to ask someone that's a director of adoption, but presumably you can see that tokenization does open a floodgate of liquidity that didn't, and it's not just that, well, the money moves, it's that it opens up entrants that couldn't previously get in. Does that make sense? And presumably your career is based on that. So I'd love to hear some more about how you feel about that.
It is, but in the end of the day, it's not a rip and replace. And unfortunately, if you're speaking about financial ecosystem, these are complicated creatures. So of course, it enables you to unlock new revenue stream from one side. It enables you to reduce, I would say, operational costs from the other. It also includes some cost in terms of introducing the technology from the sake of processes, from the sake of integration, from the sense of actually deciding which use case, which asset you're going to tokenize. So in the end of the day, you're absolutely right. My career is based on that, and I'm a true believer. But I do think that one needs to look at it with the relevant lenses on the sense, because it does require, I would say, a level of understanding, planning, and in-depth consideration vis-a-vis the wider picture. Because in the end of the day, you don't have two separate financial ecosystems. You don't have the decentralized finance one and the centralized one, and you need to make them communicate with everything the financial ecosystem requires, from regulatory to compliance to processes.
Yeah, and I don't think as an industry, again, I'd love to hear from other people that have been in ages like myself and like Susanna. I don't think we've all, as an industry, made it very accessible. Like my mum, who's in her 70s, hasn't got a clue what I do for work. You know, she occasionally sends me a message saying, oh, you know, Bitcoin's hit 100K. Is that good for you? I'm like, yes, it's good for me, mother. Jesus, you know. So I think that I'm not sure that in order to get the so the tokenization needs adoption of technology. And that I think is a social trend. But I don't think as an industry we've been that hot of making it accessible, is my opinion. Like to get that next, if you look at any big crypto company, it always says next billion users. It's like in the first 3 lines of marketing, like we'll help get to the next billion users. So I think maybe we're sometimes a little bit inaccessible, just I think by virtue of the industry, I think.
Excellent.
I think one of the challenges, I think one of the challenges here is, I agree that liquidity alone, it doesn't make it, but it's because you don't have as well a secondary market. I mean, you have to build a secondary market, which industry has to build. Can't just come. And the secondary market is being built with what Odelia said, interoperability between the players. Number one, and number two, having a favorable regulation around in order to build the secondary market. You can tokenize everything under the sun. You like banks are tokenizing all liquid, everything they have. But if they don't have a secondary market, what do I do with my token? I have my token, I have my bond now, and a token, and there it is, and there it sits. And I can't trade it because there is not a secondary market there. So because why is not a secondary market? There's no liquidity there. So you need to operate within other players, not within one financial institution, within the whole ecosystem in order to operate, in order to gain all the benefits that tokenization offers.
I have a question before we pass on to Sarah and Leon, just to follow up on what Delia, Susanna, and Catherine are observing here. So my question is, to whose benefit is it? Is it B2B? Is it B2C? Is it C2C? Like where does it sit?
I think in the end, it's in all of the above, right? I mean, in the end of the day, the ability to, many people say fragmentation, democratization. In the end of the day, you're taking a huge elephant and you're chucking it into different pieces, and then you create different types of asset classes that are now more accessible to the end consumer, to, you know, my mother, my aunt, and so on and so forth. So from one side, you do enhance the portfolio of investment, enhance the instrument, enhance the ability to generate, to hold, and to create value for the end consumer, which is phenomenal. From the second hand, from an organization, from corporate institutional level, you create, like I said earlier, from one side, enhancing a lot of elements with regards to efficiencies, right? Whether it's from transparency, whether it's from automating a lot of the processes via smart contracts or other technologies and so on and so forth. And you're also enabling the ability to, I always say it like almost reimagine capital markets game, because now you have much more flexibility. And I think that in the beginning, I mean, in 2019, I started my PhD on CBDCs. And back in the day, everyone used to refer to the programmability of money. And now we're almost witnessing the programmability of assets. So again, from a capital market finance play to your question, it has a lot of potential and a lot of advantage from the institutional level. From a C2C perspective, which I'm still rubbing my head, what do you mean by that? Is it peer-to-peer lending or?
Yeah, exactly. Like to the consumer interaction there.
Yeah, then yeah, also again, from the ability to use all kinds, I think tokenization is one element from the wider decentralized finance image. And that enables you to use all kinds of other, I wouldn't call it mediators, but service providers that enable you now to take much more automation and autonomy versus how you consume and how you trade and how you basically purchase your financial product and services. So now you can exchange currencies and values and tokens and goods with different peers around you without necessarily being dependent upon the operating hours of your bank or upon, you know, which language, how much cost, how high are the fees for different types of service providers.
Thank you, Delia. Leon, Sarah?
Yeah, I'll jump in. Look, from my perspective, real world asset tokenization has the potential to be the biggest next evolutionary step in the adoption of blockchain, because what it does is it brings in the real things that people understand, and it's the process of that transposition of bringing it into this digital world, which I think people are just find far more easy to understand. I think whereas sort of with cryptocurrencies, their volatility makes them attractive because people want to make money off them and, you know, get in and get out quick. What I'm seeing with real world assets is people having to think a little bit more closely about the nature of the thing they're tokenizing, how that will be considered from a regulatory perspective. You know, you think far more carefully about questions like, is it a security? Is it just a normal sale of a normal good, or are there other things that are triggered? And from a lawyer's perspective, that's amazing, because I think we're asking the right questions, and I think we're going in the right direction in terms of how we're seeing sort of the different stakeholders look and think about real world asset tokenization. So I think what's been great so far is financial services has really seized upon it, and I think we're almost talking about them and one and the same thing. I think what's in reality going to happen is we'll see financial services do the first sort of big jump into the space, but I think the application is so much wider. You know, if you're an artist, if you're somebody that you know, if you know want to tokenize antiquities literature in universities and allow people to access it, you've got to, you know, real world asset tokenization is going to be the thing that you're going to use to do that through NFT or whatever other token you choose to use. So I just see it as like the next big evolutionary step, and I think it is it's the inflection point. It's the moment for me where people are thinking about the regulatory questions and thinking about the nature of the tokens and how they ought to be treated legally and from a compliance perspective. And I think that conversation didn't happen when cryptocurrency jumped onto the scene, but I'm pleased that it's happening with what we're seeing with real world asset tokens.
I can build on that if that's okay. So yeah. I've been in crypto, whatever it is, 5-6 years now. So I've been privileged to sit down with regulators really early doors. I've lobbied regulators, I've sat with governments in a number of jurisdictions. I represent my own views now, not the views of my employers currently or previously, when I say that the FCA has been some of the most difficult to deal with, in my humble opinion. So I'd love to hear. I'm sorry, Leon, I didn't know where you're practicing as a regulatory lawyer, but I'd love to hear whether you feel like the regulatory framework is ready for the tsunami of tokenization, because it feels like most regulators have got a reasonably good handle on the ML side, and they've got a reasonably good handle on, you know, how to prevent market abuse. But I'm not convinced, and of course I'm not a lawyer. My expertise is not regulatory, like a number of people on this call. I'm not sure if the regulators are ready for that tsunami. So I'd love to hear your opinion and anyone else on the panel that has the regulatory background.
I think you've hit the key question perfectly there, Catherine. And look, from my perspective, the real challenge that I think is coming is the classification piece. I think that in the absence of a really strict codified system of when something is a security token, when something is a utility token, when something's an exchange token, when it will be in or outside of perimeter, without more detailed guidance from the regulator around that, you are in these really kind of vague areas.
Yeah, the no man's land. And who wants to be in a regulatory no man's land, particularly in the US, right? When they're like, oh, well, we'll just regulate by enforcement. We'll just put some people in prison and see how we get on. You know, like it's no massive surprise none of those crypto businesses are that interested in the US as a market. And I think what you were saying about the democratization of, you know, raising that funding and, you know, the access to markets that people haven't had, to me, it's really exciting. I want to be able to access female-led businesses, or I've got a particular interest in horsey stuff because I'm a horsey girl. Like, I want those really small micro businesses to be able to raise funding as easily as someone does on the stock exchange. And I think there's just such you know, the whole point about blockchain is that it's fairer. Like, that's kind of like, if you're a proper like original crypto GGM pirate, you were talking about that it was better for the world and society as a large. And I want to be able to see, you know, that village hall that wants to raise some money for the new roof saying, oh, actually, it's really clear that the regulator treats tokenization in this way, and I can release a token and I won't go to prison because actually I'm just the vicar in the local village church. So I want to see those rules coming in, because I think without it, you're just not going to be able to get the benefits of tokenization that are clearly there, is my personal view.
Right. Thanks, Catherine. Sarah?
Okay, so I do agree with most of what has been said. And I just did, for the sake, because the original question was, you know, what are these RWAs? You know, what is it that we're doing? I think for the sake of the audience, we need to bring it a step back and say, okay, how do you tokenize real world assets? So you have real world assets, which, you know, the speaker, you know, very appropriately called, you know, the real estate. So a piece of land, or an artwork, you know, or an antiquity, or a watch, or luxury items like Birkin bags or Louis Vuitton bags. All of these are real assets that actually live in the world of reality, you know, that we use all the time. So how do you tokenize those? Well, you need a token. So you normally use an Ethereum token, so either an ERC-721, an ERC-20, if it is a fungible token. If you need permission written in, I heard somebody, you know, saying AML. Well, yeah, then you need a permission token. So you're looking at the ERC-3643 or a 2 layers token, so an ERC-6960. Or a 1400 if you're talking about securities. So depending on what is the assets that you're tokenizing, what is the nature of the actual real asset, then you're looking at a token, and what kind of token are you decided to use to tokenize it, to basically put it in the virtual world and create a digital asset. And then you're looking at a market, at a platform, and everything else. And I don't want to limit to the ERCs that I just said. Algorand as its own, and you know, Chainlink is sponsoring the T-Rex that I just said, the 3643, and so on and so forth. So you need expertise at a coding level, which nobody is really, you know, with all the panelists know about, because they're all really much embedded into it. And then you need a market, so you need a platform, you need a DeFi product, you know, business plan, and so on and so forth. Now, I also want to make a distinction between tokenizing one asset and tokenizing for the sake of fractionalizing it so that more people can come in and own it. people that you don't know, because I can fractionalize an asset and then sell it to my love, family, and friends, all the people that I know. But what if I want to fractionalize a piece of art like the Kiss from Klimt that the Belvedere Museum did back in 2021, and have unknown people have access to it and own one of the 10,000 tokens that I put out there? Well, then you need a platform, then you need an audience, so you do need a market, and you need people that not only feel comfortable about owning tokens, which is just a certificate of ownership, that, you know, is a certificate that represents a portion of that one thing, and everything else that goes with it. You need to decide a price, and then this thing could potentially be transferred, and so on and so forth. So then you need rails, so, you know, an ecosystem that allows for that trading. So I just wanted to put these things so that, for the sake of the audience, we were all on the same level playing field. And then we could talk about, you know, the real issue, which is, you know, how do you regulate it? And there is, you know, I think, Leon, there is one big thing in the US, which is the Howdy test. And we can't go around that. That's kind of the first thing for securities. But maybe, you know, the question is, how does that apply to, you know, real estate, you know, and real estate DeFi solutions, much more cooperatives like, or DAOs, you know, the MakerDAOs does real assets tokenization. You know, how do you get those big players then to participate, to make sense of the small regulation or principles that we have to deal with?
Thanks, Sarah. Sarah, before we delve into the legal regulatory compliance aspects, I also want to bring Scott to the mic shortly, because, you know, there's a whole fancy RWA jargon going on. But to an extent, Scott is also actually utilizing the blockchain in its own unique ways. So, Scott, how are you working with the blockchain in your own unique ways? And then after Scott, we're gonna go back to like real applications, like real projects that maybe could be used to contextualize to the members of the audience, so that they can look at things from that perspective. Scott.
Yeah. So I mean, the obvious one would be the blockchain analytics software. I have a lab of tools that I use, you know, some paid for, some open source, you know, a mix of both, and it doesn't necessarily all have to be crypto based either to get the answers that I need. I think it's important to sort of look at, say the illicit side of crypto. You know, a lot of stuff, it's still exactly the same as it was when I was dealing with frauds years ago. You know, it's still the same sort of methods being used, the same type of social engineering. And it's the same scams. It's just gone from, say, rare earth metals to investment fraud, you know, romance fraud. It's still the same, but the investment vehicle's crypto. So the way that I use the tools, you know, it's the obvious one. Like, you know, I'm an expert witness in court cases, so the tools for me are fundamental in terms of being able to show everything that's happened, you know, from the very beginning, what occurred at that time, and then at the very end, you know, where is it now, or where did it end up? And being able to show that with the tools, because it is all open, it is public, completely transparent. The tools will give me labels such as if it's interacted with terrorism, if it's interacted with scams, child sex abuse material, you know, you name it, it's, you know, it's going to be on there. And then again, I can then verify that via other means on open source or other paid tools that we have. And again, those visualizations, you know, they're the fundamental for any evidential sort of report that I do, and being able to then explain that to, you know, like, you know, you can have a judge there that's not necessarily going to understand anything to do with blockchain technology or anything. And, you know, and it was pretty much the same when I was dealing with a complex fraud. You know, it's just one of them things. And again, the same for any jury that might be in a court. You know, they're not going to have, you know, obviously there's going to be exceptions, but generally no one's going to have a clue what you're talking about. So with the tools and using that technology, you know, I'm able to show visualizations and show hop to hop to halt. So I can, I can easily explain for a non-technical audience, I can go, the funds went from A to B and then to C, and that's why they belong to that person or whatever, and that's why that person's in court at the moment. That's probably the main way that I use the technology for my side of things.
And Scott, compare this to you probably 5-10 years ago before the Bitcoin ledger, and I'm not talking the Bitcoin coin to the members of the audience. I'm talking about before the ledger. So has it improved your practice in any significant way? Are you seeing is there buy-in from the stakeholders, or are guys still like, no, we prefer the good old days before crypto and blockchain and Web3, because that's lots of rubbish that's still going on across boardrooms right now?
Yeah, you still have your resistance. People fear change, and that's always going to be a thing. You've got people that are comfortable in their lane and they don't want to move. But for me, give you a prime example, I might have been dealing with just a traditional finance fraud years ago. I would have to. I was an accredited financial investigator with the National Crime Agency, so I had legal powers that allowed me to phone banks and get information. But they would only give you very limited information. I would then have to go to court. I'd have to get a production order from a judge, which I'd then have to serve on that one bank only. I then could be waiting months in some occasions, and some banks are a lot worse than others. So you could be waiting for months for the information to come back. And again, it would just be, they'll only give you so much. They'll only give you like just in that time period that the offence occurs. So you could even only be looking at a week sometimes. So only a week's worth of transactions, and that's it. You could be looking at 10, 15 transactions maximum. But by the time you get that information, there was no CCTV. The money had gone. It'd been too long. Too much time has passed. The money's gone. Whereas if I'm using blockchain, I can look at it live. I can see where it's moving. I can put monitoring alerts on. I don't have to go and get court orders to get that information. I can follow the money all across the world, and it's so much easier. So much easier.
All right. Thank you, Scott. Now let's go to the actual, the heart of the discussion today, the applications of this. And when Sarah was mentioning ERCs, me and my nonverbal communication, I was watching Odelia and saying her being like, not quite ERCs only. There's other things. Yeah, Odelia, I saw you. I watched you, yeah? So I'm going to start with you, Odelia. In terms of real world applications, what's going on and what are the challenges and such things that you're facing? Because we really want to understand this under the hood perspective without getting so technical, but make us understand your day in, day out with this technology and, use cases. And then this question is going to apply to everybody across the board so that we really tackle it from under the hood in a non-technical manner. So Odelia, so correct Sarah that it's not just ERC tokens only.
Indeed. I mean, listen, Ethereum is an amazing protocol, and there's lots of
by the way, I did not mean it was just ERCs. I'm saying that's normally where people, start with, just for, ramping up.
You're digging a hole. But jokes aside, I mean, there are different types of protocols, and I think that to your question, which is spot on, right? What are the real world use cases that we can use? I think that one should always, or mainly institutions should always start basically by finding and identifying what's the most relevant protocol, because whether it's Ethereum, whether it's the XRPL, whether it's other, each one has its own features and capabilities. XRPL, right, just to focus for a second, is basically a ledger that was designed from its inception for financial services application. So a lot of the things that the other ledger enables you to do through smart contract, through configurable, are basically predefined as basically pre-configured functionalities that are designed. So a lot of the elements, specifically if we're looking about tokenization, and even more so obviously around real world assets tokenization, everything that has to do with the play around settlements are a lot of the pre-configured that the ledger, that the XRPL enables you to do from start, like I said. Everything that has to do with the trading and with the exchanges of those tokens, XRPL ledger has a centralized, embedded, decentralized exchange, which enables you already to do that internally from day one. Same goes to having all kinds of applicable escrow accounts and other, like I said, more playful, flexible financial elements that enable you to design, to tokenize different types of asset classes. To your question regarding use cases. So like I said, I really think that it really depends upon who is the player, which is actually coming to look into these different types of tokenization and what are you trying to achieve. And as I think it was Sarah that mentioned, some of tokenization projects are meant only to break the asset into different pieces, and then the project looks differently. Others are targeting to support different types of financial activity. And I'll give you an example from financial inclusion, right? When I was with the World Bank, one of the projects that we were focusing on 3 years ago already was around securitizing crop receipts. Crop receipts are actually a financial asset that serves a lot of agri-farmers within different types of developing markets. This was a project in actually Eastern Europe. But whereby what we were looking for is to take this piece of paper, which is a crop receipt, which basically represents a commitment of an asset, to digitize it, securitize it, create it into a token, and thereby winning two birds in one hand. One, creating standardization to this, again, certification of ownership by making it a digital standardized copy. And from the other side, enabling different types of financial institutions and other partners to trade with this asset. Right, so this, I think, is one example which has to do with more developing markets, financial inclusion, and I think in general that the whole world and potential that digital finance and tokenization offers is even far more eroding and impactful within the developing markets and within the developing worlds, because through the use of only cell phone and very limited backlog of legacy systems, you can achieve quite a lot. From the other side, other use cases include, for example, pre-collateralized loan. How can we use different types of digital assets that we have, whether that's crypto, whether that's NFTs, whether that's other type of digital assets that I own, as collateral for different types of financial applications. Now, here, there's a lot of play around how do you hedge the risk? How do you use custody? Because again, these different types of application from a financial institution play do not live in a silo. So you also need to, I would say, to look at the wider picture, and to Sarah's very in detailed, fantastic explanation of the process towards tokenization. The one thing I would add is, and once you have completed that, you then look around you and complete the wider picture of how this tokenization process relates and resonates with the overall business operation in terms of what you do, in terms of, again, compliance and regulatory, specifically for financial services. So I think this gives a few examples. Of course, like I said, there are many others, but this is just, I think, to initiate the discussion here.
Thank you, Odelia. Susanna?
Yes, of course. So, for example, at the moment, we are working on tokenization of real estate out of the Middle East. So again, it depends always out of the jurisdictions we are working on. So smaller jurisdictions or more accessible jurisdictions, such as the Middle East, which is very innovative and looking itself to be an innovation hub, is much more lenient within their regulations and is much more flexible within their regulations compared to, for example, the European Union, the UK, or we don't want to even say the US, because until now it was like Mordor for everyone who wanted to do anything there. So, said that at the moment we are working on a project there, but there are other real estate projects. For example, the St. Regis Aspen Resort, where 5% of the equity was tokenized a time ago, and that raised millions. And so it lowers the barrier to enter into having an investment where usually bigger investors would only be accessible for bigger investors, and smaller investors wouldn't have access to that. So tokenization helps there. Then another of the things we helped and worked on is, for example, tokenization of a commodity such as gold. You can tokenize, you have to look where is the gold, a tangible gold, not to be mistaken with stable coins backed by gold, but tangible gold. And again, it lowers the entry barrier for investors to be part and to have their flexibility and invest in different assets and have a more diverse portfolio, even though you don't have that amount of investment to make. And another one, and I finalize with it, that I find very, very interesting is, for example, the fractionalized asset ownership of agricultural equipment. When you look at emerging markets, when you look at some regions where you have farmers that maybe can't afford to buy equipment by themselves, but they buy it all together, they rent it out, you can loan equipment, you can then through smart contracts have ownership of the equipment, tracking usage, use of payments, repayments, and it gives again a possibility to lower the barrier and have maybe an equipment that you don't need all year long, and you can loan it to your neighbors, for example. So these are just examples that I think are very, very, very interesting moving forward into tokenization of real world assets.
Thank you, Susanna. Catherine, you want to give us a proper deep dive into everything Susanna and Odelia have mentioned before we move to Keneal and Scott for that in-depth security discussion?
So yeah, I don't disagree with anything that Adelia and Sarah have said. I think it's key to say that a lot of the big banks who've got substantial innovation projects and R&D efforts are doing quite well. So, I think if you're in crypto, looking at all the mailing lists and headlines that we all do, pretty much, well, not daily, but, sort of weekly, you have, massive financial institutions coming to the table. So Standard Chartered, I've been very privileged to sit with Renee, who heads up digital assets across the entirety of the organization, does a lot of public speaking, particularly in APAC. If you get a chance to follow him on LinkedIn or see him speak, he's phenomenal. There's a lot going on with, big players like Goldman Sachs, Deutsche Bank, Citi and UBS. And that's not to in any way take away from the fact that tokenization is good for communities that were previously excluded. And look, it makes my heart sing to hear Adelia talking about, I was a farmer for a decade, so I love her talking about, farmers being able to raise money for kit or be able to get paid for their crops. That makes my heart sing. And I know one of the things that we were talking about on our call a few days ago when we were prepping for this session is actually how far ahead in terms of CBDC. And I know, again, that's been mentioned a few times on this call. And to me, CBDC and tokenization are probably two sides of the same coin. Again, willing to debate that with anyone that feels differently. But if you look at those nations that have successfully launched CBDC, and the Caribbean is light years ahead of any other territory, which is wonderful, they have done so they've done so on the basis of they have citizens that they know will appreciate that as a service, which is phenomenal. I spent a lot of time in the Caribbean. I worked for an asset manager based there. My God, I'm really old, like 20 years ago now. So I've spent a lot of time, and there's huge variety right across those Caribbean countries, which is great. And I think, it's great that the huge banks are doing it. I always have in mind that the end user that will be benefiting from that is probably the opposite end financially. So look, headlines week in, week out from big institutions investing, because ultimately this is a cheaper, quicker, more efficient way to move money. I know that was the opening statement of a couple of speakers. So it's not surprising that, banks, asset managers and hedge funds are all heavily looking at digital assets and tokenization.
Yeah, but Catherine, I have a question for you. So in terms of the people who are coming in, like the future founders like Nova, who's on this chat, and Favor and our other students in the cohort, and they feel like, Bitcoin is now 100K. Is it too late? So is it, this aspect of utility versus trading, it's still up in the air, so just bring some clarity on that
Yeah,
point.
sure.
And any other panelists can also chime in on that point, because this whole aspect of 100K and
Yeah. So I think I'd say two things. Firstly, this does not constitute investment advice. Do your own research as always. Just getting my in for the FCA. Otherwise, I'm going to be needing Leon as a regulatory lawyer quicker than I probably ideally want. So I think you probably deserve an award but we're about an hour and a minute into this conversation. I think I've heard the word volatility once. So look, let's go back a little bit to those of us that have been in crypto for years. There was a point at which 10% a day swings were like quite normal, right? And now there's volatility and volatility, right? So we need to get over the fact that there's too many cryptos in the world. My view is we probably need no more than 50 tokens, is my personal view. So look, if you're investing in coin number 8002, wonderful for you. Does it have long-term usage? Probably not, is my humble opinion. So I think for me, if someone says, look, I'm thinking about getting some crypto, am I too late? Which is the words you use. Is it too late? We are absolutely at the foothills of adoption. So if you look at the adoption of anything, and there's probably some different ages of people on this call and listening in on the recording. If you look at the adoption of anything, whether it's having a color TV or having a TV that wasn't 2 foot deep, it was like, 10 centimeters deep, or having a smartphone, the adoption curve is always the early adopters. And then you kind of get to that moment of critical velocity where there is no turning back. And again, I think I've heard someone say the point of no return on this call, which again, I would agree with. So yeah, super early in terms of the adoption of digital assets and tokenization. And look, one of the things I love, I do a lot of speaking to the press. I go on BBC World News and I write for some of the newspapers, is that about 3 years ago, I would lie in bed on a Sunday texting, WhatsApping my friends if crypto was in the press, the mainstream press. And obviously we don't bother now because it's kind of on BBC News absolutely every day. So it is getting increasingly mainstream, but we are super early. So again, I think we are, in my opinion, at the moment where there is no turning back. But again, I think there's just such huge growth, both the trend and of course in the valuation of what I call blue chip crypto.
Thanks, Catherine. I want to hear Odelia's point on that before we move to the security men and the lawyers in the house. So, Odelia, I want to hear your point on the aspect of utility and the playing the market thing, because XRP prices have also been pinging up and down like an ECG machine in the hospital. So what's going on?
That was rough. That was rough, but I'll appreciate it. I'll take it like a man. Listen, volatility has always been an issue. I think that again, this is an extremely volatile market, right? And I always say, from one side, there's always been this huge promise of what this technology can do for you, and from the other side, there's the curve of adoption. I have to say, since my days at Deloitte, we used to say, honestly, every year, this is the make or break year of the blockchain. Every year we're saying, listen, there's been too much POC. Now we will see things in production. Now we will see actual use cases every year. And every year, it's kind of coming to the next year because there's so many other elements. In the end of the day, I think we're facing really extraordinary time. I think that from an adoption perspective, from a corporate use cases perspective, I think that the first adopters and the main use cases that we will see would be for institutional players, mostly from asset management, from investment houses, and so on and so forth. As much as all these like very inspiring projects like crop receipts, like agri, like commodity are amazing, we've also seen all kinds of different and let me intentionally be a bit radical, like the petro a few years back with Venezuela trying to tie the country currency to the oil reserve. There's been all kinds of very ambitious things, but in the end of the day, I think that at least for the coming years, what we will see is a very intense capital markets play in what this technology can do for you. Also, Ripple, obviously, and XRPL, as I said, is designed to serve those kind of use cases. So we have a lot of new, I would say, applications in partnership, for example, with a company called Archex, whereby we're designing tokenized money market fund and enabling, again, additional flexibility and additional play, taking, I would say, more traditional things, tokenizing them and enabling different layers and levels of play, of adoption, secondary, even third markets on that aspect. So I think that this, in my perception, will be what we'll see at least in the coming years. One more thing regarding Katrina's comment on CBDCs and real-world assets as being in the two sides. I'm not sure I fully agree with that, I have to say, because of, I would say, the pure thing that CBDCs are basically a liability to the central bank, whereas all the other assets, all the other tokenized are not a liability to the central bank. And I think that that is a huge difference that people need to take into consideration. Indeed, the operational level is very similar. Indeed, let's call it the methodology is very similar in terms of indexing and securitizing assets. But in the end of the day, when you have one central player that is the one doing it and is the one who has in front of him monetary policy principles, guidelines, and inspiration, then the picture looks a bit different. But that is in my humble point of view. Thank
Thank
you.
you very much, Odelia. Now, let's go to the security men and women in the house. Susanna, Scott, and Kinil. What does this mean in terms of security challenges? And then it can neatly tie into the legal regulatory compliance aspects. And Leon and Sarah, you can pick up on those points as well. So Scott and Susanna are going to start with you. Then Kinil, we're going to go to you and you give us a nice deep dive into the Caribbean aspects, because Catherine has mentioned something interesting, that she's seeing a bit of adoption in the Caribbean. But you and I, based on our Caribbean experience, we kind of are looking at it like things are still a bit quite slow. And Sarah, you also have some Cayman experience in your bag, so you could come and chime in on that. So Scott, Susanna, security repercussions, challenges in terms of this whole revolution.
Yeah, so I suppose we could start with the main security concerns associated with these. I mean, for me, and it's just my personal opinion, it's ensuring that the legitimacy and the authenticity of the real world asset, because everything else, whether it's an issue with smart contracts, with data or custody issues, that's stuff that can be dealt with quite easy on an information security level type of thing. But when it comes to the authenticity of the actual real world asset that you're tokenizing, that's the foundation of it, and if that doesn't exist, if it's misrepresented, or if there's legal issues with that, the token loses its value. And then you have investor trust issues, the platform can collapse, and it's just, and that, for me, that's why that's probably the most important side of it. For me, there's obviously loads of other concerns, and I'll pass to someone else if they've got a different concern they want to raise. If not, I can go on to a solution for that.
You could, okay, Susanna.
I'm not the security expert here, but in terms of risk mitigation, I would say in order to get the appropriate platform, the appropriate infrastructure, the appropriate architecture in order to build the tokenization platforms, you need to have an appropriate due diligence done of these third parties that you are bringing. And I just give you a little example. You are a financial institution, you have to build your tokenization platform in-house, and you are bringing third party crypto natives, let's call them like that, into your house. That's already a security risk that you have to mitigate. You have to look as well if the goals you want to achieve are achievable by the architecture and the infrastructure you're bringing. And another quick example from a matter that we worked on is for just random numbers, as I can't explain too much about this matter. But if, for example, you have to do 10,000 transactions a second, and your platform only allows you to do 1,000 transactions a second, you're already failing. You're failing from the very, very beginning. So this type of due diligence, and when you try to build a tokenization platform for example, financial services, you need to do this diligence before and actually look, what is your goal? What are you trying to achieve? And is the platform scalable enough to achieve it? So that is from a risk mitigation perspective. Of course, you have then another security and risks that you bring in, and you have to close these gaps. You have to identify these gaps. You have to surround yourself by specialists who understand what are these gaps, because these are all components that you bring into your house, and these components need to know how to work together and have a right workflow. That is, for example, from a risk management perspective. And I just wanted to point out on Odelia's point before about CBDCs and Catherine's point about CBDCs. I sit on the digital euro as a subject matter expert on a European level. And I have to agree a little bit with Odelia that these are two different things. And actually, yes, it might have the same foundation, the same basis, but CBDCs and tokenization are absolutely two different animals here.
So,
animals that we, Catherine, please.
Yeah, look, I think our industry is so new. There's absolutely room for healthy debate, and certainly respectful of any viewpoint different to my own. I think my point is simply that you'll get much more social acceptance of tokenization and the ability for normal folk to interact with it if CBDC is a thing. So forgive me, I know I'm preaching to the choir, Susanna, but it is highly likely that the majority of the world's banks will digitize their currency in the short to medium term. So it is my view that you will get much more uptake on tokenization once the trend for CBDC is established. Again, totally happy to hear other views, but that's my personal viewpoint. I do agree it's different technology, so I think we can agree on that.
I agree with you that would be another that the world banks will adopt it. At the end of the day, they have to live together with cryptocurrencies, and they have to live together with stable coins. And I don't think that one or the other, it needs to be you need to select of one or the other. I think they will live together in the future, and they need to learn how to live together. And I completely agree, Catherine, all on your side as well.
Thank you very much, Susanna. Odelia, you have a point on the security aspects. Then we move to Scott for the solution, then Keneal for the, the IRS perspective.
So, honestly, from a security perspective, I would say that this is the claim for fame for XRPL, that we've never been hacked in the entire, I would say, more than a decade that the XRPL has been in production, and different types, and the wider, I would say, the volume of assets being transactioned keep rising and rising. Touch wood, up until today, everything has been solid with zero error, and I think that is quite a remarkable achievement from an XRPL perspective. On the wider, the wider picture with regards to how can one mitigate those risks, of course, dealing with different types of tokenized digital forms of new asset classes, introduce a lot of new securities, right? We've mentioned a few of them. Obviously, compliance regulation is one of them. I think accounting and tax are additional ones that a lot of financial institutions are still struggling to face due to, I would say, the very wide diversity that we have across regions, jurisdiction, and countries between different types of asset classes and what considered as what, and so on and so forth. As I mentioned before, I think that the interoperability remains a key challenge, right? Both internally with internal system and both between different types of ledger and protocols. And I think that in order to really reach that, we would need to come up with some kind of a consensus vis-a-vis, the technical standard that different types of financial institutions or other players that are dealing with this world of tokenized assets will be able to train and to interact between one another.
Thanks, Odelia.
The two for me. Thanks.
Keneal, now your security perspective and you chatting about the entire Caribbean region. What's the ground truth in terms of
Well, frankly, I 100% agree with what the ladies are saying, especially what you just touched on, Odelia. I think this has to be a global approach as far as having, whether it's a platform or just common understanding about how this is actually going to work. The jurisdictional tax compliance, you're right. It's not just the US perspective. It's not the UK, it's not Canada, but to touch on the Caribbean, with the exception of probably Bahamas having the sand dollar. No one else has truly adopted anything, but it will happen. I do find, and you go back and check all of our recordings. I've always said the Caribbean always been slow to adapt, only because it does have to take into consideration the laws, whether it's FATCA, EU rules, sanctions, and then they're always, due to their lack of resources, they're playing catch up. So that's why I do think it'll take a while for a lot of these Caribbean countries to essentially become more digitized, but it will happen. Initially, as you were all speaking, I was taking some notes, but you tend to answer the questions that are coming up and in depth. But the last one I was left with on here, not to pivot a little bit, was the policy, law, and regulation. I think, and I hope I'm not contradicting myself, but if I am, I am. We always say we need laws in the book, we need better policies, better regulation. This is almost a chicken and the egg question. I think we should develop these platforms just go out here and with great conscience develop them, and as they say, build it and people will come, and then we pivot our laws and our regulation. But you're right, we do need our leaders, our countries, our institutions to come together and have not necessarily one way of doing it, but we do need standardized processes across the globe, because we're talking about something that's not going to change one country, one jurisdiction. I think this will be global. So pivoting back to, I know a lot.
So Kenil, I have two questions for you. So in terms of the Caribbean movement, does the American situation, as from the 20th of January, does it change anything in terms of the uptake of the of the entire Web3 landscape in the Caribbean based on what's happening in America?
Frankly speaking, I don't think, and I'm speaking my opinion, and this is not politically endorsed or not, I don't think it will matter whether or how anybody will vote or who's in office. I think naturally businesses and technology will progress regardless. Now, the fact who's in office will kind of exponentially change. I do, because laws and regulation will change. It's weird because I think we're moving so fast compared to all these years when we've gone from the dollars to credit cards and digitizing bank, where now I think it's exponential. So will it change? Yes. Is it going to change? It's going to change. I just think that the US as a whole, people are saying, oh, there's no stance as far as the IRS, Congress and laws on the book. It will change. I think what we have to identify is what are the platforms and how it's going to affect the consumers. I think that's why we have not seen a total clear definition of things, whether it's or its utilization with Web3, any type of crypto, or now also digital banking, because it's moving so fast that I think we're trying to apply yesterday's laws. But I figure my hope is that as things progress, the laws will then, or the policies itself will essentially be shaped to now define a lot of things that are standardized in our language.
Right. Another question before I ask the panel, the entire panel, a question is, so are you trying to say that you'd rather ask for forgiveness than permission? Is that your long shot?
Always. And if you look back at history,
that was a very rubbish answer, bro.
It's tough to ask a regulator, also law enforcement. So Iris is always the conflict, right? We're in law enforcement and we're regulators, but we've always believed that it's better because I think people will always understand you put your best foot forward. Right. And this is also assuming that when you develop something, it was also with the best intention. It's not like this is the greatest scam ever. I hope it is not. That's what we always say. It's either it is or it isn't, but we're in the middle saying, I hope it is and I hope it isn't. But talking to, what I would call the old school folks that were aware of what was happening when we got the credit cards, when we got the digital banking, the wire transfers, what was really happening there. There was a bit of fear the same way we're here as well, too, as we're progressing towards digitizing everything, because it's granted so different because it's happened much faster. It's the same fear of the unknown, but look how the policies, the laws, and the regulation caught up. It's not like they existed before. We just applied old laws to new technology. I think the same will happen. And then you'll see the mass change of what the policies and the definition and the standardization of terms are, frankly speaking. But right. Yes, permission.
Yeah.
Permission is not necessary.
May I just say one comment to Kenil, and without calling names, I think a few other big names in the industry have implemented your strategy in terms of better to say sorry than ask for permission. And I'm not sure that they're still laughing, judging by where they are now without calling names. But specifically, I mean, jokes aside, when dealing with this industry, when dealing with this scale, and indeed, it's a chicken and an egg race, right? Because the innovation and the technology always advance much faster than the regulation can grasp. And the idea is to create some kind of a healthy balance in between. But together, I think that specifically in this market, it is extremely, extremely important to try and embrace standardization from day one. I said, even here in a panel with 3 lawyers and very serious law enforcement investigator. So I'm sure that they have their own perception on this. But yeah, I think it's extremely essential here specifically. And again, jokes aside, if we're trying to create and to build an industry which will be perceived as a secured, as an honest one, as one that follows the rules, right? So even if they have yet to define clearly our rules, we as an industry need to create our own framework in order to create a standardized manner of operation for both consumers, customers, and for ourselves.
Thank you, Odelia. And as Odelia said, Keneal, yeah, you go.
Real short, I know you, real quick. Also, 100% agree. I think part of it too is there are existing laws. As long as those ones are being followed and we try to stay within what we call the boundaries, I think all will be well. It's always those outliers, right? That we always say that one rotten egg or that one bad apple spoils it for all. But hopefully that's not the case as we move forward.
But if I can ask, Keneal,
Yes.
as I mentioned, I've sat with regulators at various levels of maturity over my career in crypto, and there's been the good, the bad, and the downright incompetent. Do you think? I hear what you're saying here. Let's try and be within the rules that are there. Do you think those rules are always fit for purpose? And again, forgive me, I'm not quite sure. I know you're based in the UK. I'm not quite sure where you practice over your career. But if those rules aren't fit for purpose, if you have, firms that are keen to do the right thing, to Adelia's point, there are some that are, perhaps flying very close to that line. So yeah, I'd be interested in your opinion. Are those rules always fit for purpose? Because my personal opinion is that a lot of the regulation trails behind the technology, is my personal opinion.
And Sarah, this goes into your area as well, so you can chime in as well. So Keneal, yeah?
Yes, and I'll be very precise with this one. So majority of my career, I'm still with the IRS. It was been in stateside, so financial investigations on individual institutions, money laundering, tax evasion. I am now overseas, still under Department of Treasury, IRS criminal investigation. My work is just bridging the gap between investigations that touch on the international side. Now, you're right. Just as you hope we've all saw in the news, major institutions like, for example, HSBC, TD Bank, these are well-known, prominent institutions, and what they were charged with, or as they would say, admitted to doing and paying fines, was helping, whether it's cartels or individuals, launder money, hide assets. So, as we say, there's the institutions. The rules exist already, but you're going to have those individuals who always, as we want to call them, the rotten eggs or the bad apples. They're going to do what they're going to do regardless. Some people prefer to choose profits over following rules or over people or what have you. But the reality is the rules already existed. It was not known to them. They were aware. They just chose otherwise. I think the same will happen to a lot of these entities that are now created thanks to the progression of technology. You're going to have your few that stay right there on the cusp of the gray, which, you get it, it happens. But then you're going to have some that just told right over the line, no conscience, very well aware if they're going to do. So nothing new. As I said, the policies will eventually catch up, though.
So I think, Leon and Scott, you're going to have jobs for a long time, right? I can't see you being without, some real need for Leon or Scott in your life for a while. But I think
I hope so.
there is I'm sorry, and you too, Leon, sorry. There's a real difference, though, isn't there, between organizations and people that are facilitating money laundering for enormous crime organizations and the organizations that are developing new products that perhaps don't sit within a regulatory framework right now. So I kind of feel I've recorded a webinar on Thursday where someone asked me the question, is regulation overreaching? And I found myself unable to answer that because the ultimate reality is, Keneal's right, there's always going to be bad actors, but is the cost of that innovation? And I found myself, interestingly, unable to answer that question. So just putting that out there.
Sarah, Leon, you guys want to help? Because now this is your area.
I'm just going to jump in for 1 second, Leon, and then I'll leave you. So a couple of thoughts. So we might have regulation, it might be the right regulation, it might not be the right regulation. I think where things break down, aside from the bad actors out there that are always looking for arbitrage, is enforcing. Do we have actually people that enforce the regulation that we actually have? And the answer is most of the time, no. FinCEN is 300 employees. What do you do in America? Like things are, they're going to fall through the cracks, unfortunately. And that's the biggest, the biggest one out there. A couple of thoughts that came up on the CBDC. I completely agree with you, Delia. CBDC is fiat, tokenized fiat. So it goes under, the CFI, the government run trifecta of money and money economics. I think where the issue and all the other coins are everything else, and you can call them commodities. In Canada, we call them commodities. In Russia, they're securities. In the US, well, we don't know. It's smart property at one point or another. There may be securities, question mark. But what I think that from a user perspective, really the problem comes up is trust. Right? If you do not trust even your fiat, if you don't trust it, then there is not going to be adoption of that or of the tokenized version of it. And this is really evident in countries where people go around with wapples of cash because they don't know if they ever going to have enough to pay for their life the next day. So I think that's one problem. And two, I think it was Susanna's point about appropriate platforms. I really believe that's the main issue, is to have really strong governance at a level of the platform, and XRPL might have super strong governance apparently, but that's where it really comes down to, outside of the regulation that is out here, do you have regulation inside? And do you actually make people having the education necessary to follow the regulation and the rules and the ethics that your company is implementing? And lastly, just to answer the questions from the viewer, if it is volatility is right or not right, I grew up thinking that volatility is okay, or high volatility is okay, if you have a high appetite for risk. So if you're one of these people that have high appetite for risk, then the volatility actually will work in your favor, because it will present really high opportunities to either get in or get out of the market, of any market, not just crypto. And remember, Bitcoin, you can buy a little bit. You don't have to buy one Bitcoin. You can buy like small Satoshis. So, but not endorsing it. And yeah, I'm just gonna finish right there.
Leon.
What more is there to say after that, Sarah? I think you covered it.
Okay.
I'll throw in my 2 pence anyway. Look,
wait, Leon, don't wrap it up takeaway style, because we have one more round of questions and then takeaways. So don't take it away first. If you can't if you can't answer, pass on the mic.
Look, I mean, going back to the question that I think Catherine raised about that dichotomy between regulation and innovation, it is a challenge ultimately. But I think certainly from the UK's perspective, you kind of have to roll it back, and the regulatory framework is intended to be tech agnostic, and that cuts both ways. So you shouldn't have a situation where a particular technology is immediately bad, but equally, you can't have a situation where you've got new technology and you don't think any of the law applies to you. So you have to try and find the middle ground. And it really, the answer is it's challenging, and all the points that everybody's raised feed into the difficulty. But I think the best answer is the point that Odelia made, quite frankly, which is try and internally govern yourself correctly. And I always go with, for my clients at least, I always make the point, nothing kills companies quicker than non-compliance. Establish compliance frameworks, establish standards. I had the fortune of spending 2.5 years as a financial crime prosecutor offshore. And the biggest thing when you were thinking about, can I take this all the way to trial, is who am I going to put on the stand? Who's my bad guy here? Who's my bad person here? What's the picture? What's the story I'm telling? And I think when you have sometimes you are going to have just technical breaches, and it is what it is. But when you're creating a picture about a recalcitrant business that is just offending badly, that is a much more difficult objective to achieve, where actually they have good internal controls, they have good systems, they have policies and procedures, and they're taking every single step to mitigate against risks. That is the best position you can do, the best position you can take. And what you do secondary to that is lobby, feed into the process, to the consultations, try to force some of the viewpoints as to what the law should be. But it really does boil, for my sake at least, the best foot forward you can put at this stage is just trying to think about what are those risks and organizing yourself in a way that mitigates against them. And that is the best thing you can do. And more often than not, that actually goes a long way.
Bloody hell, that was good, Leon. Now, a breather, a breather. Okay, guys, where are we going to be in 2025? What's your ideal situation? As I said, we have this ongoing technological policy in America that's literally sweeping everything away, and markets are being, very bullish when it comes to that. In the UK, Rishi Sunak was kind of bullish. I can't hear anything from Keir Starmer. Scott, is there anything happening? Catherine, you're the one always on BBC. Is there Susanna as well? You UK guys, Leon, what's Keir Starmer doing when it comes to this policy? Because he's not as bullish as what's happening in America. So what's happening next year? In a few weeks' time, what's popping after the 20th of January? Oh, and Odelia as well in Europe. What's happening as well?
Well, I can go a tiny bit with the UK. So we have consultations and more consultations, and we continue with consultations, and eventually, after many consultations, we will decide what will happen here. My guess, and that would be my bet, and this is only a personal view that I give, is that it will be an enhanced MiCA coming, something that Mika's already doing, or let the BRIC brothers in mainland Europe try it out starting 30th of December. We will have a look. In the meanwhile, we continue our consultations, and then looked at Mika and say, all right, we can do it a tiny bit better. So we will approach around Mika and do maybe a few enhancements here and there. And then we continue with the next consultations if we can then do something more. That's my little opinion around the UK regulation.
Wow. Thanks, Susanna. Odelia?
Let me take Europe. So following up on the main and major following consultation, I think that Mika is doing great, honestly, which is very, very surprising from an EU perspective.
Odelia, I've had some other feedback on Mika that it's really been a dredge. People are really finding it. Yeah. But we'll take your position.
I haven't finished this. I was going to say, I think it's doing great on the sense of enabling, I would say, to classify and address different type of asset class, right? I think that on that, Mika is relatively advanced. Indeed, it takes a long time. Indeed, we're waiting now for Mika 3. I don't know if you know, we're already in 3. So basically, they're constantly updating. I think that relatively to other regulators, they are paving the way. And I think that to your question before regarding the US, since the crypto days started, we always were looking at the SEC as the main leader, as almost the North Star. And I think that recently, with the major endeavor that started with Mika, but not only, right, Germany and Switzerland had two very separate regulatory framework at the beginning, but I think that everything is consolidating under Mika. And I think that Mika is now becoming almost like the market standard. Disclaimer, I think there's a huge player which is doing a lot of waves and attracting it to a different direction, which is obviously the UAE. The regulation in the UAE, unfortunately, is very different than the MiCA in terms of asset classification and in terms of how it looks at different types of securities, utilities, and so on and so forth. I think that this is not working in our favor as a community. I always thought that global technological solutions requires a global technological framework. And of course, this is challenging not only on fintech, but in general. But I think that on the same breath, the UAE, Dubai, DIFC, and the regulator there are becoming quite an impressive powerhouse, attracting a lot of companies and creating I would say that their regulation, and don't quote me, is a bit more simple, is a bit more simplifying with regards to the do's and the don'ts. And I'm sure the lawyers here can elaborate a bit more, but just from a proper market application perspective, that is my perception. I think that in the end, we will probably see a few hubs, right? So it will be MiCA, the UAE, potentially UK, the States, Brazil, obviously Latin America is also very much moving forward, again, led by Brazil. But I think that in the end, again, we would need some kind of a global framework because otherwise it would be extremely challenging. But I'm very keen to learn from my colleagues here, the lawyers. How do you see the key differences between the UAE regulation and between MiCA?
Excellent points, Odelia. Catherine, I see your mic is live on hot.
Oh, so I'm not a lawyer, so I will just interrupt super quickly. So I think Singapore might be missing from that list. Forgive me if it blanked out. I didn't hear that. So I think the thing that's interesting to me is how politicized crypto is. So there's phenomenal work being done in the UK by a couple of trade bodies, which is Crypto UK and also Innovate Finance. Have had a bit of interaction with the regulator and government over the years via those two. Keir Starmer, our current Prime Minister, was super quiet over his election pledges and hasn't been enormously verbose since. But look, if you look at what happened with Trump coming in and that massive gains on Bitcoin when it hit 100K, he just wrote 100 on Twitter, on X, 100K, you're welcome. So I think my big prediction for next year is the increasing politicization of crypto. Because look, if Trump does start buying up huge amounts of it as a treasury asset, look, you look at what happened in El Salvador. They were literally riots in the street when that was accepted as legal tender. I know we've talked a bit about CBDC. Not everyone loves it, right? So I think the big trend for me, it's weird to me in the UK that Keir Starmer has been so silent. Our regulator, the FCA, has taken a real trolley load of criticism in the last couple of weeks with a report from our MPs. If you get a chance to read that, it makes some quite damning reading, actually. So yeah, increasingly politicized, I think. And yeah, I would agree with Adelia. I think we've got to get to a stage where there's almost a bit of global consensus about what that regulation should look like.
Yeah,
open to lawyers for
we'll try
legal
pulling
answer.
somebody from the FCA to come into one of those webinars very soon next year. I tried, but they've been very sketchy. But that's for another day. Scott?
Yeah, I pretty much agree with what's been said already. There's not really that much I've seen going on or being said about. I mean, in contrast to that, I am quite busy with things that are happening as a result of crypto. But yeah, in terms from Keir, not really hearing much at all. And I don't, I can't see. I think he's busy. He's more worried about other things, I think, at the moment, and this is on the back burner. Fill me with beer, and I'll probably tell you more. But yeah, I not got much more to add than what Susanna and the others had already said.
Yeah, Keneal, what's happening in the Caribbean and what's happening stateside, and what are we going to see?
Well, as I said in the Caribbean, I think everyone's been on standby, awaiting EU, UK, US, Canada to make decisions, define everything, and essentially develop the framework. So no disrespect to the Caribbean in general, but you do find that it's a waiting game so they could comply and, quote unquote, no disrespect, to fall in line and be on the same page as well. Now, for the US, I do find that 2025, I'm maybe fingers crossed and being too hopeful that this is the year where I think there will be more clarity because you've seen the vast movement of everything, whether it's crypto, Web3, and everything on the blockchain. I do think more will happen now. Especially you've seen a lot more investigations, a lot more inquiry, a lot more ask of Congress to do things and to move things by both sides. So I do think 2025, granted, I might be jaded as well, will be the year. I do think we'll see more happen.
2025. Sarah.
25.
Well, in Canada, we don't have ad hoc cryptocurrency regulation. We think it may be commodities. Sometimes it's a security following the securities laws. So what I see for 2025 is volatility. I think that we used a really good word just before. I think that the incoming administration or in the world, there is a lot of weakness from a political perspective, and from an economic perspective, there are some headwinds. So in my personal opinion, I think volatility is to stay and a lot of uncertainties, which, it's not going to be ideal. Uncertain, markets don't like uncertainties generally. We as consumers don't really fare well in high uncertain times. But that said, as I said before, there may be opportunities. So there you go, opportunities, I think, for refinement of the technology, for polishing the script, so that if there is a tokenization movement of real assets, we get really great, strong entrepreneurship business plans out there and great case studies. In the arts where I am most focused. I think it's a great thing for authenticity, for provenance, for immutability, for chain of title, for democratization of trading royalties, for example, and other things. So I think the quote unquote environment is going to be interesting. And that's my take.
Thank you, Sarah. Leon, and guys, remember now we'll be heading into takeaways now. That was just a wrap up of 2025. So, Leon, what's your take on 2025 policy et al?
I mean, from a UK's perspective, I think well, we've had the FCA crypto roadmap, and I'm looking at Susanna here. I'm sure she's got the utmost faith that that roadmap is a hard time frame as to when things are going to be done. So they're
Was it
making
just
the
a
right
one
stand.
pager that what was
It's
it
worrying,
just a
isn't
one
it?
pager?
It's a worrying one pager, and not many.
Yeah, I was so
went.
disappointed. Such an anticlimax.
I mean, look, for what it's worth, I think I agree with what everybody else said. I think it's going to be a bit of a watching brief on the UK side, at least for now. I think that they will closely watch what's happening with Mika. I don't think they have the stomach to kind of follow what we've seen in the UAE. I just don't. I think if I was to sort of look at the distinction between the UAE and the UK, I think the UAE is, you can first walk and then you can run. Whereas I think in the UK, it's like, come to me straight away, running, already set up and good to go. So they're just not giving people that organic growth time over here as they are in the UAE. And that's always going to be a massive, that's to do with various reasons, such as the jurisdiction, the numbers involved, etc. But I think what we're going to see in 2025 is increasing scrutiny on financial promotions. I think they're going to really attack the way that different token projects are marketed, how influencers are used. And I think that seems to me to be the FCA's chief tool at the moment in terms of an enforcement strategy. It's all around the financial promotion stuff. They don't want to touch with a barge pole, I think, whether something is a specified activity or whether these tokens are specified investments. They don't want to sort of put any hard rules out around that I've seen, certainly in terms of engaging. So I think that's where I think we'll see things. And I think perhaps going towards the back end of 25 into 26, we'll start to see some actual substantive messaging around what the framework's going to look like. But I don't think we're going to see huge changes in the next 12 months.
Thanks, Leon. So at this point, we're going to take a breather and ask if there's any questions in the audience. We're going to take 3 questions if there are any, because looking at the clock, time is really running. So does any member of the audience have a question? You can quickly raise your hand. Keep it short, keep it brief. If you don't have any questions, we are going to move on with the rest of the agenda because our panelists also have to attend to other things. So going once, going twice, going thrice, that's gone. So let's do our takeaways. So Scott, we're going to start with you, and then we'll allow the gents to give their takeaways, and then we go to the ladies. Okay, so Scott, we're going to start off with you.
Yeah, I mean, as it's just said, I can't see much happening 2025 in terms of any real changes. I think it's just going to roll on very slowly, and like was just said, till the end of the year, beginning of the following year, maybe they'll get round to doing something. Everything I've ever seen sort of over here seems to take years and years to work out and to just to get things published. It just takes a long time, and I can't see that changing anytime soon. I think that in terms of all the illicit stuff that's going on, I think that's going to continue. Ransomware is the #1 thing every year and has been for quite some years now. Always involves crypto nowadays. I think illicit actors are just going to carry on creating new great ways of scamming people and organizations, and there's going to be some pretty clever hacks and exploits happening, I assume, into the next year, as there already has been. But the key is they use the right tools, they use the right systems. A lot of these hacks and things like that, it's just been basic information security things that they haven't done, pretty straightforward. you know, if they can nail that as they're scaling up, shouldn't be as bad an issue. But yeah, generally, I think things are just going to carry on as they were for now.
Thanks, Scott. And I think with the more innovative scams, then people will come up with more innovative ways of beating the scams and keep in business, Scott. And
yes, I think I'll be busy for a few years.
All right. Keneal?
Wow, there was a lot covered today, and I was trying to figure out what's a good way to sum up what was said. This is tough, but the one thing that resonates or stands out to me is if something is to happen in the short term, I hope it focuses on the consumer because, as you just brought up, Scott, and as we've been seeing, whether it's a scamming and people, you know, being taken advantage of, people losing access to their wallets, losing their crypto or their tokens. It's been tough to watch that because you have seen a lot of people who have been divested and as well as invested a lot into it, and now to see what, you know, what their future looks like with the loss has been tough because this is the future, and to see that people are already being taken advantage of. I'm hoping 2025 is where the laws, the regulator, the consumer acts, whatever those may be, are developed to protect the end user, because essentially that's what it's about, right? The people, no matter what. So despite the companies that are out there, it's the people, you know. So hopefully all the powers that be focus on what, quote unquote, the little one, the little man, the little woman, the little boy, the little girl, and protect and you know, provide for them in a digital aspect. So fingers crossed.
Power to the people, Keneal.
Power to the people.
Yo, Leon.
So my apologies to me today. From my perspective, and I think just sort of bringing it back to RWAs, I think we're going to see a bit. I don't think we're going to see a huge change in things. I think it's going to be a case of it's still a bit of an uncertain area. I think people are going to have to just build and then we'll figure it out as we go along. I think there's going to be there's going to be various dialogues to have, and yeah, I mean, I think I pretty much made my points when I spoke a bit earlier. I haven't got much more to add to that.
Yeah, thanks, Leon. Catherine.
Look, so I'm an eternal optimist, right? I think crypto will continue to really flourish as a technology and as a community. I think that my major takeaway is that having seen different types of technology hit the regulators are always behind that. So that was the same with, in the UK, CFDs, peer-to-peer, blockchain, and then AI. So my big thing now is how AI and blockchain interact. I think it's going to give a lot of people a headache. So yeah, huge amount going on in our space, and I think lots of reason to be hugely optimistic for the near term and the medium term.
Thanks, Catherine. Sarah?
Okay, so I am cautiously optimistic, a little bit less than Catherine, I think. You know, if anything, the internet has shown us is that there is no international legislation about the internet, and a lot of this networked new technologies, you know, follow a little bit of that trajectory of user adoption, and if on steroids, I would say. So, and in a highly fragmented world, east, west, south, north, I think there is a little bit of some headwinds in a global harmonized approach to crypto, but that said, I think the silver lining is that every single government is kind of taking stock to the fact that this is not going away and it's not a fad, and there is more and more solutions being adopted, scripted, implemented, launched, and so they cannot not afford to you know, to do something about it. What and how it would look like, we'll just have to wait and see, and that's my prediction.
Thanks, Sarah. Odelia.
Thank you. So first of all, a lot has been said. I think my 2 cents closing up would be that the world of crypto is a very complicated picture. And I think that as we advance with technology, as we advance with business use cases and with other operational framework, we see more and more branches on this tree, and we're naming those branches, and I think that that's a great progress. I think that market education is something which is extremely important, right? To make sure that people understand that there's crypto, and then there's all the other applications which are maybe, you know, rooted within the main elements of this technology, but have very different applications. I think that the one thing we haven't discussed, which I'm quite surprised of, which for me is basically the number one thing we are expecting, is basically the conversion of AI and blockchain, for better and for worse, right? For better on the sense of, again, using it as many other enterprises are using it to optimize a lot of their processes, but for worse, where basically the world of tokenization enables you almost to create new economies and new monopoly games from nothing. And what happens when you have the best army in the world to basically design those new monopoly games? From one side, it enables you to create fraud in a whole different scale. And from the other side, what happens when you have AI agents that are going on and opening millions of wallets, or pumping projects or pumping tokens? And just this morning, I think there's a new peak of the GOAT project by Binance that was released. It's been, again, a pump and dump by Binance itself. So, I mean, I think we would have to use different types of tools, again, to our investigator here and to other laws, in terms of how do we even from one side grasp, conceptualize, and then also protect and create some kind of standards to, from one side, not to hold AI, amazing technologies, from advance and making our lives easier in one aspect, but also protecting us specifically when it comes to digital finance, tokenization, new projects, raising capital, and also in the journey to basically make it as an accessible new asset class for people that do not have all the, you know, information that all the people here in this conversation owns, in terms of understanding and being familiarized with the entire picture. So I think that AI and blockchain will be a very serious topic. I predict to be many more committees with consultation on how to deal with it. But I think it is maybe the most priority to deal with, because I think otherwise we'll be in serious troubles. So that's for me.
Thank you very much, Adelia. Susana Esteban.
Yeah, we will be leading the consultations from here. My takeaway here, my little takeaway. I think we will see much more institutionalization of real world asset tokenization, and I believe, and I'm as well an optimist, that we always look to our big brothers over the pond, and I believe the US will have a push next year, and this may have a ripple effect globally, but especially here in Europe, where investment strategies will integrate much more, or part of their portfolio, much more real world assets or tokenization, real world assets tokenization. Then furthermore, I believe there will be a push in maturing the institutional grade platforms, to look more, to offer more scalable solutions, more security in these platforms in order that they can mature, and more interoperable solutions. So I would really like to see that. Maybe that's a wish just from me, but I believe that there are many projects working towards interoperability, and to see how they can work together. And then there's another third point that we haven't even touched upon, is the foundation for digital identity. There will definitely be a push, and there's already having a push in the tier one banks to look and to see how digital identity can have a convergence within this whole ecosystem. But I think that is another topic for another day, which we can unroll very much. But there will be a cornerstone for this tokenized ecosystem, and can be a position to provide secure, verifiable, and user control identities.
Thank you very much, Susanna. And thank you very much to all the panelists. You guys, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. And it was fantastic. It's literally one of the best sessions we've had. I know Kenil and Sarah are like resident experts, and they've been in various panels, but this was incredibly good. So we are really grateful. And members of the audience as well, like, we thank you so much for your time. It's been 2 hours and it's literally flown by. And as you said, and Kenil always say this, like, some discussions were left on the table, and like the AI one and the digital identity one was kind of left on the table. And we'll be inviting some of the panelists again in the January session to like exhaust these points, because like this, you know, our sessions, we have such wonderful speakers, and there's so little time that our sessions can literally be an all-day conference, but we just need to know where to draw the line and stop, because we always overrun. Whenever I send it out there to the speakers, it's 1 hour, it's a 1 hour webinar, but it always becomes a 2 hour webinar. So we are really grateful for your time and your sacrifice. Thank you so much. And Blockchain Lex Group and CryptoMondays Caribbean and Africa are entirely grateful to you, and our students as well from the No Long Thing community are entirely grateful. And to our sponsors, XRPL Commons, thank you for being neutral and being good sports. And like, we enjoy working with you guys. You've been really supportive and really helpful, and you know, the knowledge you're providing to our community as well. We are really grateful for that. So guys, it's been a fantastic night. Have a good night wherever you are. Good day, good morning, wherever. Be blessed. Have a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. We'll be in touch, and we'll roll out the programs for next year, and we'll be in touch to let you know about what's happening next year. So have a good night, everyone, and bye-bye from